Can you actually sculpt a collectible doll with cheap air-dry clay? Today I'm putting 3 budget clays to the test, sculpting a whimsical art doll to the smallest detail. Will they crack, crumble, or surprise me? I'll compare texture, detail, smoothness, and more. So if you ever wondered which low-cost clay is worth your time, stay tuned. Hello everyone, welcome back to my studio. Today we are doing a fun little experiment. I'm testing out 3 budget-friendly air-dry clays to see how they hold up for doll making. In my videos, I always recommend getting good quality clay, like La Doll, so the clay would work with you, not against you. But I know it's not always feasible to spend money on your hobbies, especially if you're just starting out. Hopefully today we will find some good, cheap alternatives and you can start sculpting without breaking a bank. I'll be sculpting this cute little radish doll. It has some small details that will be more difficult to sculpt, especially the hands. So I'm interested to see how these clays will perform there. I want to compare how they feel, sculpt and dry, and how different they are from my favorite air-dry clay, La Doll Premix. Here's my selection today. I picked these up from my local stores and online shops. They are all under €4, so under $5 as well. All of them are made in Europe, so they might be pricier in the US or other non-European countries. But I'll try to find where you can purchase them online internationally. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. I purchased all these clays with my own money, so I could be completely unbiased in my reviews. I'm not getting any monetary value from this except from a few affiliate links I have listed below. So it's not an ad and I'm genuinely interested in finding good, affordable clay for sculpting dolls. Okay, now let's get on with the video. My first impression of Fimo air-dry clay is that it's quite wet and grayish in color, with a texture that reminds me more of a traditional ceramic clay than typical doll-making clays. It's smooth to the touch, but doesn't have that light feel that stone clays like La Doll usually have. The texture is closer to something you would fire in the kiln rather than air-dry sculpting clay. But it does blend nicely and you can smooth it out easily with a bit of water. What I did notice though is the stickiness. It leaves a noticeable residue on your hands, which can get a little annoying, especially if you have sensory issues and don't like sticky or dirty hands. Compared to La Doll Premix, which doesn't stick at all, this one feels messier to work with. That said, it's not a deal breaker for me, it's just something to keep in mind. There's also a faint smell to the clay. It's kind of a mix between ceramic clay and glue or some kind of marker scent. It's not strong or overwhelming, so it didn't bother me too much. Although it starts out gray, it seems like it's going to dry white, which I'm curious to see. I'm also watching for how smooth the surface stays once dry and whether it's prone to cracking. For this first layer, I'm not too precise, I just try to build a base layer that I'll refine later. With La Doll, I never get cracks or major shrinkage, so we'll see how Fimo compares. I've used Das air-dry clay a few times in the past, mainly because it's incredibly accessible here in Lithuania. You can even find it in larger grocery stores. Back then, I wasn't a fan, it didn't handle small details well, and it had very strong, almost chemical smell. But it seems like they have updated the formula because now the smell is completely gone, which is a big improvement. The texture is pretty typical for standard air-dry clays. It has visible pulp in it, so it's not as smooth or fine as La Doll Premix. Still, it feels quite pleasant to work with, and I'm curious to see how it performs when sculpting smaller details. Since I remember it being tricky to use for fine work, I'll be sculpting a tiny hand for my radish doll to really put it to the test. I think that's going to be a good challenge for this clay. So far, I'm actually pleasantly surprised. For such an affordable clay, it might be a great option for beginners or casual sculpting. It doesn't leave as much residue on your hands as Fimo air dry clay does, though it still has a bit of stickiness to it. Carroplast clay comes in a smaller package than the other clays I've tested, but the price is very reasonable for an air dry clay. Right out of the package, it feels a bit crumbly, definitely a different texture compared to most clays I've worked with. You have to knead it a bit so it becomes more pliable. The good news is that it has no noticeable smell and doesn't stick to your hands at all, which is a big plus, especially if you don't like messy materials. Once you get used to the different texture, it's actually quite nice to work with, though I still notice some occasional crumbling while sculpting. I'll be sculpting another small hand for my radish doll with this one, and I'm curious to see if that drier texture will get in the way of finer details. It does absorb water really well, so you can smooth it out and soften it quite easily, but needing to revet it constantly might become a bit annoying, especially if you're working on something delicate like the doll's face. Fimo Air was definitely the messiest of the three clays to work with. As expected though, it dried completely white instead of grey. Unfortunately, I did notice some hairline cracks on the surface after drying. It wasn't anything major, but it's still frustrating, especially since I never have this issue with La Doll Premix. Another thing that stood out was how heavy the clay is, even when it's fully dry, so I wouldn't recommend it for dolls where having lightweight parts is important. In my opinion, this clay is much better suited for sculpting trinkets or small figurines than dolls. That said, it does sand beautifully. I was able to get a really smooth satin finish using various grades of sandpaper and finishing with a very fine one. Sculpting the features was also quite pleasant as long as you revet the surface to help the fresh clay stick properly. This particular doll is quite primitive, so sculpting the features wasn't difficult. But if I had been working on one of my usual ball-jointed doll faces, I think I would have really struggled. It would just be unnecessarily hard with this material. Overall, Fimo Air still reminds me a lot of traditional ceramic clay. It's great for sculpting small objects or decorative pieces, but I wouldn't recommend it for delicate doll making. Dice clay pleasantly surprised me. I used it to sculpt this tiny hand for my radish doll, and it held up pretty well. I did have some trouble blending the layers together. They tended to separate a bit, which made smoothing a bit tricky. But out of the three clays I tested, Das was the clear winner. For that reason, I was curious to see how it would perform on a more complex sculpt. So I filmed a separate video for my patrons where I used it to sculpt belly feet for one of my ball-jointed dolls. It definitely wasn't as easy to work with as La Doll Premix. I had some difficulty carving and blending, and the fibrous texture sometimes got in the way of fine detail. But compared to other budget clays I've tried, it performed much better than I expected. Dice clay is also on the heavier side, so I wouldn't recommend using it for very large ball-jointed dolls, since the weight might affect how the joints function. But if you are on a really tight budget, dice clay can work for doll making, especially for smaller parts or simpler designs. Carroplast clay was definitely my least favorite of the three. Right from the start, I was surprised by how crumbly and dry the texture was. The clay constantly needed to be revetted just to stay workable. I tried kneading it to even out the texture, but it still crumbled while sculpting, especially on a small scale. After the first layer dried, I found a pretty large crack at the base of the hand I was sculpting, which was really disappointing. Overall, I would say skip this clay. Even for simple trinkets, there are much better options out there. Of course, there's always a chance I got an old or defective batch, but honestly, with so many affordable clays available, it's just not worth the risk. Even with these budget clays, I managed to create a pretty cute Mr. Radish. With enough practice, I really believe you can make beautiful art, even with less than perfect materials. The clear winner for doll sculpting was Dice clay, but Fimo Air is also a decent choice for other crafts, especially if you just want to play around with clay or make some little trinkets for your home. I hope this video helped if you're thinking about trying air-dry clay for your own dolls or mini projects. Let me know in the comments if you used any of these or if you have a favorite clay I should try next. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. And if you would like extra monthly videos and behind-the-scenes content, check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.